Australia. It's known as the defamation capital of the world. Hooray! Our courts deal with at least twice as many defamation cases as courts in the UK, despite us having just over a third of their population. Now, this has a particularly bad effect on public interest journalism. So get this, almost a quarter of journos have had a news story spiked out of fear of getting sued for defamation. It's the reason that we can't tell you about how once tried to a horse out the back of the Woy Woy pet parlour in 2006. True story.
Dow Jones & Co. Incorporated v. Gutnick was a defamation case regarding an article published on the 28th of October 2000 by the defendant, Dow Jones, which the plaintiff, Australian businessman Joseph Gutnick, claimed defamed him as it alleged connections between Gutnick and certain criminal elements. The case was heard and appealed through many courts in the Victorian justice system before a final verdict was handed down in the High Court of Australia on the 10th of December 2002, with Gutnick winning the case and a landmark precedent for internet defamation being set. The Dow Jones Company is an American publishing firm founded by Charles Dow, Edward Jones, and Charles Bergstresser in 1882 and is owned by News Corp. Dow Jones has many major publications, including the Wall Street Journal and Barron's Online, but is most well known for the Dow Jones Industrial Average, a widely used metric of the American stock market. Joseph Isaac Diamond Joe Gutnick, born in 1952 in Sydney, came from a family that had a lot of influence within the Australian Jewish community. Joseph Gutnick had been a well-known figure in Australian media, mainly for his role as president of the Melbourne Football Club from 1996 to 2000, and as a wealthy businessman with investments primarily in mining. But where did Diamond Joe get all his dough?
Just sit right back and you'll hear a tale of Diamond Joe, who came to the Melbourne Football Club with lots and lots of dough. He really made his presence felt, no one stood in his way. He watches them play every game except on Saturday. He can't on Saturday.
Gutnick made most of his fortune through mining in Western Australia in mines such as the Plutonic Gold Deposit and Jundi Gold Mine for his company Great Central Mines. Gutnick also had other business ventures in the United States with a reputation as a rabbi/entrepreneur. As previously stated, on the 28th of October 2000, Barron's Online, an online business magazine owned by Dow Jones & Co. Incorporated, published an article titled Unholy Gains. The article alluded to and alleged that some charities traded in stocks of Joseph Gutnick, which was apparently unseemly, and that Joseph Gutnick had connections to Nachum Goldberg, an American convicted of tax evasion and on trial for stock manipulation. The article made heavy emphasis that Gutnick was involved in wrongdoings, or at least acting dodgy in the stock market. Joseph Gutnick did not respond well to these claims and proceeded to sue Dow Jones & Co. Incorporated through the Victorian court system for defamation. This did raise some issues, however, as Dow Jones & Co. were not an Australian or even Victorian company, so how could Australian/Victorian laws be applied to them? The plaintiff in the case, Gutnick, argued that while the article was published from New York and hosted on a server in New Jersey, it was still accessible in Australia, and thus Gutnick's character could be defamed if someone in Australia read said article. The defendant, Dow Jones, argued that since the company and its publications were based in New York, they were not subject to Victorian law, and that since the magazine the article was published in, Barron's Online, was subscription-based and not freely accessible, the law couldn't apply. The defendant's arguments were nullified by the fact that Barron's Online had thousands of subscribers in Australia and hundreds in Victoria to be specific, so there was sound legal reason to believe Gutnick's character was harmed by the claims made in the article, as the defendant could not substantially prove said claims either. In the Gutnick v. Dow Jones case, the court concluded that the content, in this case an online article, is to be deemed published where the content is consumed. An example of this would be reading a Guardian article online in China, which was originally put online from a computer in Melbourne. The same logic would apply as legally speaking. In past defamation cases, media published, spoken, seen, or heard was less accessible, with radio and television being technologically and culturally more relevant than by today's standards. More people being able to access media quicker, faster, and from most places on the planet, plaintiffs argue for broader jurisdiction of publishing in terms of defamation. Dow Jones v Gutnick did go through multiple levels of the Victorian and Australian court hierarchy before being finalised in the High Court of Australia. The case was initially handled by the Supreme Court of Victoria, which ruled in favour of Joseph Gutnick. Dow Jones then appealed to the High Court of Australia, which unanimously upheld the decision of the Supreme Court. The case was appealed to the UN by an author, William Alpert, under the right of direct petition for individuals, but was unsuccessful. As stated, the final verdict of the case was the High Court of Australia upholding the decision of the Victorian Supreme Court and ruling in favour of Joseph Gutnick, which then set a precedent for all internet defamation cases to follow, something all the High Court judges were aware of. One of the justices on the case, Justice Callanan, was stated as saying, if people wish to do business in, or indeed travel to, or live in, or utilise the infrastructure of different countries, they can hardly be expected to be absolved from compliance with the laws of those countries. The fact that the publication might occur everywhere does not mean that it occurs nowhere. The court found the location of defamation is the place where damage to reputation occurs, this normally being the place where the material is made available in comprehensible form, i.e. reading, watching, or listening. While Dow Jones did try to appeal the case, a public information officer of the High Court of Australia said the High Court of Australia has unanimously dismissed an appeal brought by Dow Jones in connection with a defamation action commenced against it in the Supreme Court of Victoria, upholding said decision by the Supreme Court. 7 High Court judges unanimously agreed that Gutnick had the right to sue for defamation. No damages were awarded to Gutnick, however. The case was finally fully settled on the 15th of November 2004, with Dow Jones settling the case and agreeing to pay some of Gutnick's legal fees. In the process of deciding this case, the Australian courts looked at similar cases worldwide, including the US case of Calder v Jones, a pre-internet case where entertainer Shirley Jones sued the National Enquirer magazine for defamation. Jones also sued Calder, the editor-in-chief of the magazine, over an October 9, 1979 article in which the Enquirer alleged that Jones was an alcoholic. Jones claimed that while the magazine was published in Florida, it sold most of its copies in California, and thus Jones was defamed. The US courts decided to hold the case in California due to the personal and business interests of the plaintiff, Jones. Dow Jones v Gutnick was a landmark case for Victoria and Australia, as it set the legal and social precedent for how all internet defamation cases were to be handled. Prior to this case, the idea of suing a publication 16,000 kilometres away was unheard of, but Gutnick and his team successfully argued that due to the nature of the internet, anyone could access the defamatory material. This changed the legal climate of Australia, as it allowed Australians to take any publication or person to court, even if said publication/person was not Australian or subject to Australian law, simply due to the wide reach of the internet. Socially, this case was extremely unpopular, with many feeling that Gutnick was taking it too far and others believing it wasn't far enough, and that more companies and people should be held responsible for their claims despite their distance and lack of any real connection to Australia. Another wider implication of this case is that journalists are now more likely to have pieces published to either paid or public media platforms be litigated for defamation in foreign jurisdictions following the decisions made in Dow Jones v Gutnick. Even if not offending the law in the place it was published, it is possible that a foreign country with different cultures and customs may see content posted online as defamatory. Dr. Matthew Collins, a Melbourne lawyer who has written a book about defamation and the internet, spoke to The Guardian in 2002 during the case, stating, "It's a judgment that will be looked at very closely by people in this area, including the media right around the world. What it means is that foreign publishers writing material about persons in Australia had better have regards to the standards of Australian law before they upload material to the internet." In conclusion, the Dow Jones v Gutnick case is arguably one of the most important defamation cases in Australian court history, as it set the precedent for all further claims of defamation in the Australian court system, primarily those concerning internet publications. Dow Jones v Gutnick gave further power to the court system to challenge foreign organisations legally, despite those organisations not operating under the laws of Australia. Ultimately, this case casts the definition of internet defamation to be applicable under laws where the defamation is seen or read, not where it is published.